Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for all attending today. Welcome to this digital meeting of the Rights of Way Committee being held via Microsoft Teams on Friday, the 26th of March, 2021 at 2 p.m. I'm Councillor John Ridgewell. As you probably know, Councillor Sean Morgan was normally doing this, but he's managed to get himself in a bit of a fix with his hand, and it's been considered it might be better if I run it. So you won't have the smooth approach that you normally have, but I shall do my best. So moving on, just to confirm that this meeting will be recorded and made available to view via the Council's website, except for discussions involving confidential or exempt items. Therefore, the images and audios of those individuals present and or speaking will be publicly available to all via the recording on the Council website at www.caerphilly.gov.uk. If I could ask, if members lose connection or anybody loses connection during the meeting, please make every attempt to reconnect. However, the meeting will continue as long as it remains quorate. Committee services staff, as usual, are all available and will be there to assist you if required. Can I also please remind members to mute their microphones but leave their cameras on? And can I please ask that officers have their microphones and cameras turned off until they're invited to present their reports or speak on an item. Members and officers should only activate their microphones after the chair has invited them to speak. We will be using Teams today for voting, and we'll be taken through that as and when the time comes. I'm not sure if everybody knows each other here, so can I take a roll call? I've got to do a bit of screen swapping at the moment because I've got a bit of a technology problem here, so bear with me. And I will attempt to call out the names. We'll work from them. Okay, thanks. I'm going to have to go off my screen at the moment, so if I could start with Lisa, Councillor Phipps.
Yeah, present.
Thanks. Okay. And could I have the rest of the cabinet members? Councillor Gordon?
Yeah, I'm present, Chair.
Thanks. Councillor Stenner?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. And I believe Councillor Sean Morgan's here. Fine, yeah. And as you know, I've introduced myself.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, John.
Thanks, Sean. No problem at all. On my screen, Tony, you're at front, so if you want to just have a quick introduction to everybody, if that's okay.
Hi, Tony Taylor-Wells, Senior Technical Manager for Taylor Wimpey.
Thanks very much indeed. And Paul, you're bottom right on mine, so perhaps you could introduce yourself as well. Paul Wells.
Good afternoon. Yeah, Paul Wells, the previous landowner for the wildlife corridor.
That's great. We have a number of officers here today. I think it's probably better at this juncture that they introduce themselves as and when they need to speak. So if you could just bear with me when I scroll back and forth. So moving to the agenda, I'd like to go to agenda item number 1, which is apologies for absence. If members are aware of any apologies not listed, please add them to the chat within the show conversation or notify the committee services. So are there any apologies for absence? I take that silence as a no, so thank you very much, everybody. Moving on to declarations of interest. Councillors and officers are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal and or prejudicial interests in respect of any item of business on this agenda in accordance with the Local Government Act 2000, the Council's Constitution and the Code of Conduct for both councillors and officers. If I could ask to put your hand up if you have any declarations of interest.
Chair,
yeah.
if you may, for consistency, I'll be declaring interest in this item today. I've declared interest in the last 2 meetings because of the chair of the Ramblers Association who've been involved. He's known to me, so I'll be declaring interest and I'll be leaving the meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Trotter, do you have any comment to make on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Robert Tranter, I'm the Head of Legal Services and the Monitoring Officer here at Caerphilly. Councillor Gordon, I've noted that you've declared a personal and a prejudicial interest in the previous 2 meetings on this item. So again today, you will leave the meeting when we get to that agenda item. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Rob. Is there anybody else that would like to declare an interest at this juncture? Okay, that's fine. So if we move on to agenda item 3, which is to approve the minutes of the Right of Way Committee panel held on the 15th of January 2021. Do we have somebody who'd like to move that?
I can move those minutes.
Thank you, Sean. And do we have a seconder?
I'll second those, Chair.
Thank you, Lisa. In terms of voting for this, if I could have some advice from someone on it. Are we going to use Teams for this, or is it just a show of hands at this stage?
The form should be launched shortly, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Chair, I'll have to abstain on this one because obviously I won in the meeting.
Fine, yeah. Okay, Colin, no problem with that. Sorry, I said Teams, I meant forms. Thank you. Can we all vote now then, please?
The minutes are approved, Chair.
Thanks, Rob. That's great. Okay. Moving on to item 4, and if I could pass over to Phil Griffiths, please. That's okay, Phil?
It is, Chair. Thank you. Can you all see me as I have a forms?
I'll now leave the meeting, Chair, okay?
Thank you, Colin. Yep.
Thank you, Chair.
Can you
all
Phil.
hear me?
Yeah,
I
Phil.
can see you, Phil, yeah.
Good. Well, thank you. Introducing the report that Stefan Denbury has prepared. The purpose of the report is, of course, to consider the deferred reports of the 2nd of October 2020 and also the meeting of the 15th of January 2021 into diverting footpath 54 Caerphilly under section 119 of the Highways Act. As you may recall, at the meeting of the 2nd of October, which followed a site meeting when we viewed the proposed paths and options available, it was agreed by committee to allow an extension of time to see if an alternative route could be found following a land transfer through the wildlife corridors, as they referred to in this report. At the time of the next meeting, which was the 15th of January, no such agreement had been reached. So at that meeting, it was officers were further asked to look at the potential of seeking a route running to the north of the residential development in the vicinity of the retail park. Officers have done that, and it forms part of this report, but we have received no response from the owners of the retail park as to their desire of allowing this. So today's meeting, really, we're looking at the options to consider additional options now that land has been transferred from Mr. Wells to Taylor Wimpey. So the report is effectively split into 2 parts. Firstly, the report looks at the options through the retail park, as officers were asked to do, and I think it's useful, probably the most useful appendix for members on this is appendix number 2, which shows the routes. And then secondly, to have a look at the subsequent land transfer and the potential routes that offers, which is appendix number 11. So as with the previous reports, you'll be asked at the end to come to a conclusion, to decide really whether you want to divert the existing footpath as was proposed in the original application, or to extinguish the route altogether, or to take enforcement action to ensure the route as shown on the definitive map is enforced, really. Fourthly, to divert onto alternative routes determined by this committee. And that's really the bulk of what this report looks into these options as to what you may want to go forward to. I'm happy to take questions as I go along. I see Councillor Morgan has his hand up.
Can I just, before Councillor Morgan speaks, apologies to David Shakespeare. I didn't give him the opportunity to introduce himself at the beginning. My screen didn't include him. So if you want to say something, David, while you're here, I do apologise.
That's okay. That's quite okay, Chair. David Shakespeare. I'm Taylor Wimpey's solicitor.
Thanks very much indeed. Yeah, I do apologise. Sorry, Sean. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about under 2.6 where it mentions that the two sides have come together on the wildlife corridor, and if Phil could talk us through where we are at the moment on this. We're all well versed with the other routes then.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. I'll come to that when I come to the second part of the report. Then I'll give a brief overview of that if it's okay. So really, the first part of the report is to investigate. It's the investigations into looking at a northern route, following the committee's instruction at the January meeting. So officers indeed looked at two possible routes in the vicinity of the retail park, and these are shown on Appendix 2, which is page 51 of your pack. We did contact the owners of the retail park, but to date haven't had any responses. However, we did look at two routes. The one which was discussed potentially by committee, which is referred to in the report as being the low-level route, and that basically runs on or adjacent to the service road to that retail park. You will see from the report that there are problems with that in terms of its width, overhanging vegetation, signage, vehicle movements, and indeed at the far end there's a 45-degree bank that needs to be accessed. These are all shown, I think, as best you can in 4 sets of photographs at the end of the report. The photographs run from east to west as you go along, as you view them. Secondly, we looked at a high-level route, which is basically running at the top of the revetments and banking to the rear of the properties. Again, this is heavily overgrown with mature trees, has some sort of ecological worth, and obviously acts as a screen from the residential properties down onto the car park and retail site down below it. So properties would kind of be affected by having a path running to the rear of their gardens or their properties, and I think we would probably expect to have objections if we were to look at that route any further. However, in summary, looking at both of those routes, as officers, we don't really think that there's a huge amount of amenity value to either of them, in short. So that's the sort of conclusion of looking at the sort of northern routes as we were asked to as officers.
Phil, can I come in just quickly there? Are you in a position to be able to share those photographs at this point, just to give complete clarity?
I can't get them up on my screen, but I think Charlotte may be able to get them.
Okay,
they are what are termed as appendices, appendix 6, 7, 8, and 9.
Phil, I think I'm doing it.
Sorry?
Can everybody see those?
6, 7, 8, and 9.
Is this one? These?
That's the first one. Yeah. That's the entrance travelling into the car park from the main retail park, going into the specific retail area for Watt and the various other stores in there. You can see the left-hand side we were looking at, that there's not very much verge there to work on, and indeed there's some sort of overgrowth on it. Are you able to move on to the next photograph, please, Lisa? That's halfway along the route. Again, it's just demonstrating there really how wide the path is. It's less than 1 metre wide, and you can see the steepness and indeed height of the revetments holding the banking back. Next, please, Councillor. This is moving up now to the final retail store, and you can see this again. It's showing the steepness of the bank, the height of it, and also it being blocked by signage that runs up, which is included in the grass verge. That access road there then runs around the back of the unit, so that's where all the HGVs go to offload the building supplies and whatever. 3 of the stores are empty at the moment, but the 2 stores which are occupied and trading. Thanks, Lisa. And then this is at the back of the stores of where the link going up onto footpath 55 would be. It's a 45-degree bank. It's on the bend of where the HGVs come around, and it would either need to be stepped, or more likely for DDA compliance to do something, we'd have to put some sort of ramp type system in there. Is that okay, Chair, in terms of description?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Phil. Yeah, thanks, Lisa. If we could
Yes,
those could come up
yeah,
now.
thank you, Councillor. I'm glad you could do that.
No problem.
Moving on back onto the residential estate itself. Since the last committee meeting, a transfer of land has taken place, which allows the options of utilising the wildlife corridor and other land previously not identified or included. This is what members sought to have resolved at the initial meeting. Issues members need to be aware of affect both north and wildlife corridors, and I've referred to those in the report, or Stefan rather has referred to them in the report as the northern and southern sections. So again, I think the best map for you to have in place here is Appendix 11, which is on page 61 of your pack. So you should see from there, which is the northern and the southern wildlife corridor. In terms of the northern route, it is narrow in places. In one particular place, there's a pinch point near a garage, which the flat bank is only a meter wide. And again, there's a photograph that Stefan's taken showing a rule against the fence line to where the drop off begins. So some works would be required to widen this path for it to be usable, meaningfully usable to all users, and that's a consideration. The majority of the route is, however, wide enough, running between 1.8 and 3 metres wide, and the properties to the edge of it are currently unsold, so there would be no sort of residential issues in terms of existing owner-occupiers. With a satisfactory width, this would meet the appropriate tests as put out under the legislation. And the final photograph in your pack, which I think is page 66, shows that narrow pinch point on that particular route. The southern route is perhaps slightly more complicated, and I'm referring to the report from para 5.24 onwards here. This again needs some widening in some places, but the residential properties, by and large, 2 of the 3 are already occupied. And there is a drop off at the southern point where it goes down onto Pontypandy Lane, which is quite significant and would need works in terms of stepping probably to be able to access that path. The area, which is of some concern, of where it actually joins Pontypandy Lane, is currently unregistered, ownership. And again, there is a plan showing titled within the appendices of that, which means that some compensation could be payable further down the line to an owner should they be found as to who owns that final spur of the land. It should again be noted that both of the routes run next to a drainage channel with fairly steep banks, which is referred to as the wildlife corridor, and certain works would be required in terms of fencing or barriers or something along those lines to stop people falling off and going into the water course below in order to safeguard the users. And there are material considerations regarding the maintenance of these once they've been put in. Particular attention I'd like to draw to the members is paragraph 5.29. Now, this is moving on a bit. If the members are minded to approve both routes, as shown on there, a separate creation order would be needed for one of the routes. We can only divert, not create an additional route under the order. Also, the routes provided at the meeting of January remain a consideration. Those are the routes that went up the cul-de-sac at the end, and we were discussing which, if either back garden, the routes could go through. Those routes remain a consideration. So in conclusion, members should be looking at the least disruptive option to maintain public access. If members refuse to make an order and decide to extinguish the path, there will likely be objections, and the planning inspectors may at a later date require us to put in place either a diverted route or reinstate the existing route. If members are minded to go for the existing route, as shown on the definitive plan, this will require the demolition of properties. Option E, shown on Appendix 11, provides an alternative to the routes previously discussed by this committee, and the route alignment shown on Appendix 11, subject to certain physical improvements on the site to widen a path beyond 1 meters, but the route C, D, E, F, J, G, B, if you're all following that on Appendix 11, running from the north, I'll repeat that, C, D, E, F, J, G, B would meet the tests of Section 119 of the Highways Act 1990.
Phil, can I just cut across there? I think, again, if Charlotte's able to share that plan for everybody, just in case we aren't all seeing it, it might be helpful. Can you do that for us, Charlotte, do you think?
No
Or,
problem. Page 61, Phil.
We're on Appendix 11, page 61.
Does that come up?
Thanks, Charlotte.
So again, I'll talk through. I'll repeat the letters again, starting from the north. C, which is where it adjoins footpath 55. So the black line to the left and to the right, really running from east to west and then north, south to north, is the existing. It's an existing public footpath. So I'm talking about route C to D, which is across land that has been vested from Mr. Wells into Taylor Wimpey. D to E, which is the Northern Wildlife Corridor, again, which is land that has been vested across by Mr. Wells to Taylor Wimpey. Crossing the road between points E and F, running along the pavement to point J, which is point J is the top of the chicane access that we looked at on site, down to point G and joining onto the footpath at point G, where it runs onto point B onto the established track.
Is everyone okay with that if Charlotte takes it back down again? I'll take silence as okay. Thank you. If we could just drop that one so Phil can return to the screen. Thank you. Thanks. Okay.
Actually, I'll refer to something that's gone off. I'll refer to a few more letters, I'm afraid. No, it's gone, sorry, Chair. Routes D to H and F to G, which are basically the Southern Wildlife Corridor, could be subject to improvement, accepted as alternative routes. So that's point D, which you'll see on the Southern Wildlife Corridor. Sorry, on the Northern Wildlife Corridor, D to H, running around the side of property 63, and F to G, which is the Southern Wildlife Corridor, could be accepted as a alternative route. Again, in terms of D to H, half the path is already adjacent to property number 63, and Mr. Wells has vested the land across to Taylor Wimpey to allow access to the rear of property 63. Any questions on that? Okay, finally moving on, the financial implications, and there are potentially financial implications. Members are asked to note that this section and the areas where potential costs to the council may arise. Whichever option we take, there are different potential costs arising to the council. The costs of making the order itself are usually met by the applicant, as are the costs of undertaking any works to bring the route up to standard. That's the physical elements of it. However, whichever option is taken by members, an order has to be made. And should an order be objected to and referred to the planning inspectorate, these costs are usually met or are met by us as the local authority. So that kind of concludes the report, but in summary, members are asked to consider the four broad options which are available, which is either to approve an order as submitted by Taylor Wimpey at the original meeting, to extinguish the route altogether, to take enforcement action to put in the route as shown on the definitive plan, or to come up with an alternative route as is deemed appropriate by this committee. And that concludes the report, Chair.
Thank you, Phil. I see, Councillor Morgan, you've got a hand up. Sean, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks, John. You didn't mention the route, Phil, CDEFG, which seems to be the one that takes in most of the wildlife corridor.
CDEFG. Yeah, that was the primary element of the report, Councillor. Let me get to page 3, 4. As shown on Appendix 11, as I said, subject to sort of surface improvements, that route CDEF. Oh, sorry, I see what you're saying. Is about utilising north and south of the corridor. In response to that, yes, that was the second part when I expanded upon routes F to G can also be accepted as a route as an alternative with provisions made for improvement. But there is the issue of land ownership, properties being occupied.
There is still issues with that route, you're saying, Phil?
Yes, I'm sorry, I haven't got the appendix number quite at hand, which is appendix. There's an appendix which shows the land which has been transferred from Mr. Wells to Taylor Wimpey, and if you note where it's at point just below point G, where it joins Pontypandy Lane, there's still an ownership issue on that. That land hasn't been transferred. And two of the three properties backing onto it have indeed been occupied. We would also have to have some access improved between Pontypandy Lane and getting up to that level on the wildlife corridor, on the southern wildlife corridor.
Okay, so the alternative to that is the one that you've outlined as CDEFJGB.
Yes, that's correct, Councillor.
Okay,
I would perhaps add to that that we can only create one footpath without an additional creation. We can only divert one footpath without a creation order. It doesn't preclude at this stage coming back at a later date to create a second footpath, but that would require a separate creation order.
Okay, all right, thanks, Phil. I'll let the other speakers come in.
Yes, I think, yeah, thank you, Sean. Lisa, I think your hand up was next. Do you want to ask a question?
I did, but does Tony wish to reply to Councillor Morgan's query? I'm happy to wait.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Tony. I'm struggling a bit with getting the hands up clear in my mind.
That's all right. Sorry. Yeah, it was more just a point just referring to the report that obviously Phil has gone through. Obviously everything within Paul Wells's ownership at the time, which obviously required us to go through the wildlife corridor, and the land to the north obviously has been transferred, now is within Taylor Wimpey control. I just wanted Phil to be a little bit more clearer, I think, just for the sake of everybody's ear, the element to the south where we go from F to G, where we've got that unregistered land and the future potential for Pontypandy Lane to be brought, to be made a public footpath. It does make reference to it in the report. I just think we need a little bit more sort of clarification on that point, Phil.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Joe. I'm happy to answer that. Yeah, as I said, the issue is we haven't got ownership of that. Members are entitled to come up with that as a route. I was just merely flagging up that there were some issues to come out further in the wash on this, and there may be some sort of compensation payable to the landowner should that route be taken, in addition to the physical works that would need to be undertaken to get up the bank, which would probably, given the ramp that's already been put in, probably steps would likely be acceptable on there, provided the ramp was protected for public access and not be made defunct further down the line. It's not a huge amount. It's not a huge amount of land, Tony, as you know. But I'm bringing to members' attention that we can't. It's not included within the agreement. There is an area of unknown ownership on there.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Tony. Lisa.
Apologies. Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I'm just wondering if Phil could elaborate a little bit more on the route C, D, H, E, F, J, please.
Yep, Jay. Yeah, certainly. The route is now is achievable in terms of being put in the land transfer having taken place. There's an area of land basically between C and D, which has been transferred from Mr. Wells to Taylor Wimpey. There's existing land to the top of the wildlife corridor, which is flat to be able to fit a path on, no trouble. And then to the rear of property number 63, that land has been transferred there of an adequate width to allow a footpath to run through run to the back of that property. Point H to almost the end of the garden, I would say, of that property, there's already a tarmac path in place. I assume that was the intention of where the route was originally going to go. The rest of the route, then, as you referred to, is along the pavements of the estate road. Now, one of the issues that we faced previously through objections we've had when this was discussed back in 2014-15, as I understand it, is that there's a dislike of going onto estate roads. So my report was alluding to the fact that, you know, what we're doing here is we're utilising a large area of off-road whilst also utilising some on-road, but that infrastructure has already been put in place, so we can move fairly quickly on that one and approve. Should members be minded to go down that route?
Thanks, Phil. So what you're saying is the routes, so C, D, H, E, F, J would be the quickest. We could implement that the quickest. That would be the quickest route. That we
I think that's a route which is available to us. I think the quickest route, probably, provided the physical works were done to upgrade the pinch points on the northern corridor, would probably be C, D, E, F, J. J down to G, down that one, utilising the northern end of the wildlife corridor in the initial instance. It helps councillor in overcoming the objections or potential objections of on pavement footpath. Because we have gone 50% of the way of meeting that by using the northern corridor, and it also still allows us the option further on down the line to develop something between points F and G on the southern wildlife corridor.
Yeah, okay.
On the southern corridor, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I've got one more question, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, fire away.
It's just about financial implications. So going forward, if we make a decision today, the only costs possible to this authority, if there are any objections received. Is that right, Phil, please?
Well, it depends. It depends which option is chosen, councillor. I should imagine if you were to go down the sort of red button route of wanting the route to be aligned on the path, the line of the definitive path where properties have to be demolished, then we will get objection in from Taylor Wimpey on that basis. What I think what the question that you are asking is that the cost to the authority when we go to a planning inquiry. Any of the routes that we choose today, we have to advertise before we can create the order, and we might get objections into any of those, which will take us down that route. I think we have to have our eyes wide open to that. But it's the officer's belief that this is probably the route that we're putting forward is the one that is least likely to get any objections coming in. Firstly, and secondly, should it go to the planning inquiry, and I don't want to tempt fate, but should it go to the planning inspectorate rather, we've considered this 3 times. We've looked at various options, and this does seem a sensible sort of compromise in the first instance, particularly with the potential to create a further path somewhere down the future to take in the whole wildlife corridor.
Brilliant. Thanks, Phil. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Sean, another word you wanted?
Yeah, I would just like to make a proposal, Chair, as Phil has just outlined the what is probably from our officer's point of view the best, most usable option, and the fact that Taylor Wimpey and Mr. Wells have got together and thank them. I'd like to thank them for coming together and working come to a compromise on this. I would like to suggest that the chair that we accept the route C, D, E, F, J, G, B, and with an addendum that we could consider looking at improving that by taking it from F to G in the future, should that become possible.
Thank you, Sean. That's been moved. Can we have a seconder for that, please?
I will second that, Chair.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, so we have a proposal on the table at the moment. Are there any more comments that we need to add on that? Because I've got a couple of points I'd like to make, but any more questions at this stage? No. Okay, fine. Okay. Well, before we move on, which I think will be the vote next, I'd like to reiterate Sean's points in terms of Taylor, Wimpy, Tony, the team there, and particularly Paul, in coming to this conclusion. I mean, it's been a long, drawn-out process. I think there were times when we all thought it wasn't going to be reach a satisfactory solution. It does appear we're on the cusp of that now. So to reinforce those points, I'm very grateful that you've all managed to reach this conclusion. So there are no other questions at this stage. We have a motion, we have a seconder. I think this should go to the vote. Charlotte, can we go to the vote, please?
Yes, Chair, the form will pop up shortly.
Okay, Chair. Just out of interest, I think there's only 4 of you on the committee, but 5 people have voted. So I don't know why that has come up. So just to clarify for the members, please, all the 4 cabinet members have voted yes. Have you?
Indeed.
Yeah,
have,
that's
yeah.
great. Okay. So I think we will record the vote as 4 members were for it, so it's unanimous. Okay, so it's unanimously been decided to go with this route, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, Paul Wells, I mean, you haven't spoken at all so far. I don't know whether you want to add a comment at this point. I mean, you've been a key player in this. Is there anything you'd like to share with us before I draw the meeting to a conclusion? I think you're on mute, Paul.
Yes, just thank you to Taylor Wimpy and especially Tony for the hard work. It was a long slog, but we got there eventually, and hopefully the residents will now have what they want. Thank you. Thanks
very much indeed. Okay, unless there's anything else that anyone wants to add at this moment in time, I'll thank you all, and we will draw this meeting to a conclusion then. Tony, you want to say something quickly?
Just thanks, I suppose, for all of your patience and determination, and likewise to Paul, obviously, for seeing this through, and hopefully we're one step closer. So thanks again.
You can guarantee that CCBC will always be committed to getting these things resolved. Thanks very much indeed, everybody. Okay. I don't know if Cabinet want to hang on for a minute or two.
Thank you.